this is a nice intimate little gathering, so I hope we have a really good conversation. I think the main thing we need to do is offer hope. I mean, that's what the left do, and they really infuse people with energy, but it's a hope based on false premises, and that's the problem with the left. Their ideas don't work, they always use counterproductive consequences. But what we need to do is give young people hope. We need to do that by being realistic. So one of the things I would say is people have really, they've got a right to be heard, and we need to earn the right to be heard by them. We need to make sure we're seen to be on young people's side. Well, one of the things that really is going to mean is housing. I've noticed this now, as I've talked to a lot of groups of young people, by which I might say under 30, but I've noticed that you can talk about all sorts of abstract ideas or tax rates or whatever, but the room comes alive when you start talking about housing. Well, why? Because people want to bring up a family, and until you've got a home good enough, big enough to bring up a family, you can't fulfil your own main ambition in life if that's who you want to be. It's a perfectly normal and reasonable ambition. And look at the state of the housing market. So I think we need to earn the right to be heard with young people by bringing hope, and that hope needs to be around some very practical issues like making sure people can afford to buy their own home. I once heard recently a lady say, of course young people have got it easy, they'll be inheriting homes. That's no good. That's no good. People don't want to inherit a home late in their life as a consequence of their parents going. They want to be able to buy their own homes big enough to bring up a family. So we really should be sorting out housing policy, and that means planning policy. Now, the next point I want to make is, and I'll try and make sure I won't go off after, we need to be really honest about context, and we need to offer young people a proper analysis of context, however tricky it might be, because if we're going to have a differentiating offer compared to the Labour Party, it should be an offer that is honest and in line with our principles. So just to make it simple, do we think whatever problems that we face, whatever crisis we have before us, do we think it was caused by government being too small? Do we think that government has spent too little? Do we think that taxes are too low? Do we think that there have been too many surpluses run by government successfully over years? Do we think that interest rates have been too high? Of course, to ask these questions is to answer them. We've got a crisis of big government, high spending, high taxation, deficits and easy money. And we should be really owning that and pointing out what that means to people. In a sense, as I said on a panel yesterday, the big shortcoming of the Conservative Party is our conservatism, because we know we believe in freedom, and then we just manage the institutions which Labour have bequeathed to us. And that takes me back to housing, because of course the reason that we've got terrible problems with housing is state land use planning and the central planning of interest rates and too much credit going in. So let's not allow free markets and the ideas of a conservative society to pollute let's not allow any confusion and a polluted discussion over the causes of the problem. We should be really straightforward and accessible when we talk to young people about the causes of the crisis. Then we should get on to ideas and action. I love a little slim book called Principles for a Free Society. We had a load of parliamentary staffers came and did a book club on it, and it was really well received because it crystallised what we believe when we advocate for a free society. Civil society, democracy, equality, a proper conservative and liberal, classical liberal conception of equality, free markets, why these things matter. And all of that, if we can do all of that, be heard, be practical, address issues that matter to young people, then we'll have a reasonable way to get onto a road ahead. But one thing we need to do, which I now want to do very much, is we need to listen. I think we need to recognise that if, like me, you're 51 years of age, your experience growing up was not the experience that people have today. I don't have children, I've got some godchildren, but my goodness, they're growing up as teenagers in the social media age, and how very, very different that is, and how it accelerates growing up, how it accelerates social relations, the problems it causes, all things which the legacy it can create for you if you get it wrong. All those things we didn't face when we were young. So I would say it's really important that politicians listen, seek to understand, and offer hope.
Thank you, Steve. That was great. I see a lot of people making notes, and I can see the cogs turning in people's minds. A lot of food for thought there. Thank you very much, Steve. That was very thoughtful. Just probably for a similar length of time, if that's okay, just sort of 2 or 3 minutes. If we could actually go to Rebecca Deegan, who I know is at the coalface of this. She's the CEO of I Have a Voice, which is we met and chatted last week at Labour Conference. It's a fascinating non-partisan organisation. So Rebecca, maybe you could give us your thoughts on this.
Sure, thank you. The one thing I would say is young people are really engaged about so many issues. They care about the same issues as anyone in their population. You know, they care about the things that are happening in their lives, in their communities. But as soon as you start to talk about the system, that's when you see the shutters come down, they disengage, and they see politics as them versus us, and something that happens to them that they don't have control or say in. Certainly that's the feel that we get when we're going into schools, colleges, unis and youth groups and talking to young people. And then, so what we try to do is start from the position of what do you care about, and then show them actually all of the things that happen in their local councils, that happen in Parliament, that they absolutely have a voice in, and that there are mechanisms through which they can raise their views. And what's really brilliant to see is when they have this light bulb moment, when they either see that their council have done something recently, or their MP stood up and advocated for a cause that they really care about in Parliament, and they're like, oh, politics is for me. I can see that you know, politicians care about the same things that I care about. And so for me, I think the key thing for engaging young people is political education. There was a recent study for their APPG for political literacy, and they found that fewer than a third of schools have good quality political education. And there's a significant skew towards fee-paying schools and state schools in affluent areas, which is leading to all sorts of problems, I guess, around political engagement as well. And 2 years ago, when it was like a bumper local election year, we ran a survey of young people. We surveyed 200 young people. 81% were like, yes, it's super important to vote. But 63% said, I don't feel like I know enough to vote. Which I think again just shows that it's political education and political literacy that's acting as a barrier for young people rather than an interest in the issues and the things that happen around them.
Thank you very much indeed. Lots to think about there. Yeah, very, very interesting. And maybe we'll go to Jem now. He's a councillor for the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. Maybe you can give us your thoughts.
Sure. I mean, the best way for me to do this is probably to just reflect on how I've come to find myself sitting at the table here today. I think it's really a question of opportunity. I come from Kensington, Chelsea. It has a reputation for being perhaps a little fuddy-duddy. A slightly older contingent of councillors was certainly present before I joined. But our leader set to change that, and what she really set out to do was to bring younger voices in. She accepted that the 18 to 25-year-old age group was actually our biggest cohort of residents. But you win elections based on perhaps 30% turnout, of which maybe 15-20% vote for you. And actually you're not hearing from a huge part of your community, and actually you're meant to sort of lead for the whole area. So that was a sort of a deliberate act in order to encourage much younger councillors into the building. I was once one of the younger councillors. I'm now happy to say I'm probably the 6th youngest out of a team of 35. So already following behind me has been a number of younger councillors.
How old is the youngest one, if you don't mind me asking?
The youngest is 25,
wow.
turning 26 soon. So, you know, for an area that perhaps from the outside you might think, oh, Kensington, Chelsea, Royal Borough, etc. But actually you've got 25-year-olds helping make policy for one of the central London, the last remaining central London Conservative council. So, but that's really only available due to the opportunity that was presented to us. That passion and belief in politics exists. You can talk to any young person, as you rightly say, Rebecca, that they are interested, but there's also an element of time that you have to put in order to have your voice heard. But actually, to make change, it's not as simple as filling in an online questionnaire about outdoor dining or a cycle lane or whatever it may be. You actually then have to go out, collect email addresses, do all the sort of hard work that perhaps people don't have time for when they're in their early years. And what that inevitably does means that you end up as a councillor hearing from people that do have the time. So your phone rings from people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, who are very well versed in planning law or historic licensing applications, etc. And that does sway your opinion, and you do have to constantly go back and say, well, actually, there's a large cohort of people that don't agree with this. We just haven't really heard from them. So we've made a real conscious effort to try and open up democracy as much as we can in KNC through citizens panels, through digital engagement, Instagram ads, Facebook, all sorts of things that historically we've never done, and actually deliver a really well, I think a really well-rounded impression of council services and where we should be going in the future. So I think that's really the takeaway for me, is you've got to give younger people the opportunity to have their voice heard, really.
Absolutely, thank you very much indeed. Neva, maybe you can give us your thoughts.
Yeah, no, of course, and thanks for getting the pronunciation of my name right.
I tried.
Kudos to you on that. So my name is Noel Sadikul Nalaki. I quite often go by Neva Nalaki these days, just because nobody could pronounce my surname on the electoral ballot otherwise, and I thought that was probably a good hurdle to try to overcome. So I'm of Turkish ethnic background. I am the chairman, as you said, of Friendly Meeting Weybridge Conservative Association. I've stood in 2 elections so far. I was a candidate in the Southeast in the historic 2019 European elections. I also stood as a candidate in the 2019 general election in Garston Hill in Liverpool. No chance of getting elected, but a fantastic experience. And I had the absolute pleasure of helping increase the majority of Damien Moore, who was in Southport, which was a key marginal for us. So really, really happy with that. So first of all, if I can take it back a step, why does this matter, right? So whenever we talk about things, I work in the private sector and I'm into my KPIs, so why are we putting energy into this and why does this matter? And I think it's just really important to keep in mind, firstly, there's the democracy element which we've touched on, which is that you want to be representative of your electorate. And that's why it's so important that we have that engagement, we have that connection. But actually, there's a second point too, it enables better policy outcomes as well. So what we see in the private sector is that generally when we've got boards, when we've got diversity in all its forms, gender, race, age groups as well, when we've got that diversity, we get more competitive results. So it's things like, for instance, I'll throw out a statistic to you guys. It's that one of the studies was showing that when a business decision was made by a diverse team, which means 3 or more people of different backgrounds around the table, it actually meant that decision makers, they outperformed other competitors by about 87%. And then you've also got it when it comes to things like R&D. What does it mean in terms of competitiveness? So when you look at gender, for instance, it meant that got radical new innovations into the market over a 2-year period compared to competitors. So there is quite a strong compelling argument, and I fully accept government is not a company, but at the same time we want policies that are actually going to resonate and that are actually going to be competitive on an international base as well, so that we can be a beacon globally and internationally for free market ideas, good governance, and we can lead in that international mission. So I think that's quite important. And then secondly, what I quite often see as association chairman is it's also up to us to kind of step forward. I'm in my mid-30s. I wouldn't consider myself a young conservative. That would be those in their 20s. But what I have done is, ever since becoming a chairman, who's perhaps a bit more youthful, and I want to thank my 2 fellow association chairmen here who are absolutely fantastic. So both Richard and Andrew there at the back. So within our group in Surrey, when we look at our membership, I'm not representative of our membership. So, we do need representation globally, but therefore it's also important for me to work with my fellow chairmen as well to understand actually what are the different things that are going to resonate, how do we bring new voices in, and in doing that, as chairman, I've been quite conscious of trying to nurture the young conservatives. One of my deputy chairmen is a young conservative, she's fantastic. And what we see is when we've got those diverse teams who are going out and knocking on doors, we actually get really good reception because they think, oh great, okay, wow, it's someone in my age group, or someone like me who's a counsellor, someone like me who's engaged or involved in the voluntary side, it helps draw those people in. But I think it's also up to us not to only look for people that look like us, speak like us, walk like us, talk like us, but to see diversity as a really important thing that we need to try to capture. And then the policies that we're putting forward, gosh, I think if we start getting the policies right, that will also help. And I think I'm quite encouraged by what we're doing now in terms of trying to empower our voters more by allowing them to keep more of their disposable income rather than taxing them and rather than giving them big government, which we used to tell them is a better place to make decisions than themselves. We need to empower individuals. We need to show that we can actually deliver for those voters as well.
Thank you very much indeed. As someone who's 38 years old, I think we were the future ones.
Listen, I'm sitting here
Sorry.
and I keep being told that I'm a young man, so I'm not having this, you know.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, Steve. Mate. Long continue. Kay is a councillor in Chingford Green. Do you know Lee Scott by any chance?
I do, of
Yeah, a
course,
great friend
yes.
of mine. We served as special advisors together in government. Kay, maybe you could give us your thoughts on all
Sure,
of
I mean, I've only been a councillor for a short time, this was my second term in 5 years, but I got involved with my association because I cared about the area I lived. I wanted the best for it. If there was any potholes, I would be ringing the council, and also to be part of an association, you get to let your voice be heard, any concerns and whatever. So I was involved with the association for about 10 years before I became a councillor. And I think we are at the best time now to recruit youngsters because they're our future, and I think they're the ones that's going to take us forward and give us the more better future for all our children to come. And I think we often get bogged down in the belief that to attract young people we need to be on hip or TikTok, but what actually is more important is treating every youngster with respect and being a role model for them, and showing them the way how they can become involved. And I've got fine examples here when I met one of my recruits here, which I recruited to a councillor. She was very interested in finding out how she can be involved in the area that she lives in, what she can do to make it better. And so I said to her, well, first you become a member. So straight away we got her to sign to the association, and then we said, you come and support our events, and she did. And we said, you also hold events in your own home for us, so she did. And sadly, COVID hit, then we had a year break, and afterwards, I mean, it's very important to give the youngsters what they need to do, and because they come and say, how do I join, how do I become involved, and just tell them and respect their views, and that's it. I mean, over the years I have introduced and recruited many people into the party. And talking about youngsters, we've got a very young chap here, Matthew. How old are you, Matthew?
23 last week.
Yeah, 23. So I think I'm really happy that we are getting younger and younger generations to join and to be involved in politics. So, I mean, my party is such a diverse party, and I think that is our true strength. And we must.
What is your background yourself, if you don't mind asking?
Oh yeah, I was born in Cyprus, Turkish Cypriot, but I've been here over 55 years. So this is always home first, and I'll go second home for holiday. So yeah, I'm a Turkish Cypriot, and I've really enjoyed being a councillor because making sure what my residents want, to have good, safe streets, and etc. All their concerns to be held the council accountable. So yeah, and that's what I've got to say. Actually,
Well, thank you very much indeed, and Matthew. And sorry, what's your name?
Shazmin.
Shazmin. Well, I'd love to hear from in the Q&A if the two of you want to make a point or anything. We've got about half an hour. We've heard from all the panel now, so I really want to take as many questions as possible. And this man in the front row is the first one.
Ricky Williams. I've been a Conservative Party agent for way too long, in the 20s years. In fact, I know Kay and all the rest of it, but one of the perpetual problems that we've had is how to engage with younger voters, and it's always been one of my jobs in a previous existence was being a get out the vote director for various organisations, and I think the answer to it is making things relevant. Actually, I was interested in what you were saying. You were talking about the statistics of people that were engaging or felt they couldn't engage. But the reality is the question mark has to be over how many of those people that we're talking to actually vote. Because when it comes down to a very difficult choice of how you spend your money, how you turn out that vote, you tend to, certainly perhaps by sin was, I tend to ignore that age group. Though I know that in the referendum, that age group were actually quite a large, the younger age groups were a large proportion of those people that were voting for Brexit. But I think that if you can make it relevant, I'd be interested to hear about how you make it relevant. And one of the things actually I've been involved with Kay on is the involvement of Turkish Cypriots within the Conservative Party, because they're a huge diaspora that is completely ignored, and also the Turkish diaspora that's completely ignored. You see in the new census how relevant they are. But really, if the Conservative Party wants to catch up, how's it going to engage with those communities, either Turkish Cypriot, and how do you make it relevant?
There's a lot in that, I think. I just maybe want to take maybe one more point, and then we'll maybe do the two together. This gentleman at the back, if that's okay.
Andrew Baird, I'm chairman of East Surrey Conservatives. It's been said that every time somebody buys a house, they become a newbie, and I think that's certainly very true to some extent. In East Surrey 6 years ago, we tried to assist government policy by proposing the building of 4,500 house garden village. One of the problems in our constituency is that it's ridiculously 94% greenbelt, and prior to making that proposal, we had very strong support from the public for the Conservative Party. All of the council in Cambridge was controlled by Conservatives. Today, we're now the third biggest group in Cambridge, having lost seats continuously to independents and resident associations. And it's entirely because of this policy. We still return Conservative councillors, we still return a Conservative MP who I think has got one of the safest seats in the country. But policy is one thing, but making it effective all the way down the chain is something that just doesn't seem to happen. So I'd be very interested in your views on that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, two very meaty topics there. Steve is rubbing his hands with glee. I'll come to you in a minute, but let's go to Neva first, because she's chomping at the bit as well to get into these.
Yeah, no, I think Claire is a fantastic example of a young MP and someone who actually champions policies that resonate with younger voters.
So
as
Claire
well.
Coutinho.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so Claire Coutinho, East Surrey.
Yeah, no, I actually wrote a book and said that she was one to watch.
Yeah.
The final chapter.
So Andrew is the chairman of Claire's.
She's great.
Yeah, no, she absolutely is. But I just want to kind of hit on the point about housing and actually looking at delivering at all levels, because when you look at the housing front, I mean, at the moment, so I do a little bit of self-promotion. I wrote an article in Con Home on all of this, on this, so please do go on to Con Home and type my name and it will come up. But what I found really shocking is housing prices in the southeast and actually across England. So southeast is horrendous, but across England, when you look at an average house actually costs about 9.5 times more than the typical earning, which is crazy. But then when people do buy their houses, they're then kind of hit with exactly what you've explained, Andrew. And I think the point there is
supply side problem.
Exactly, it's that supply demand side challenge. Now, how do we overcome that? And I think this is where we do need to actually have more localism. We've got one of the most centralised governments from among the developed economies, so OECD economies. So we need to actually have a bit more of a bottom-up consultation, discussion. But we also need to actually make sure that in the way we're moving forward, we utilise the tools at our disposal. So we've got platforms like Conservative Policy Forum, which engage with individuals, which actually say, look, what are the policies that would resonate with you, and draw those into number 10, into the manifesto. So the last manifesto, more than half of the ideas actually came from CPF. So I think that's the kind of thing, we need to look at what are the tools we can use, how do we actually make sure that however long we're in government, hopefully forever one would hope as a fellow Conservative, but you know, we actually use that time to deliver some more government, to deliver bottom-up decision making, and get into some of those tough questions. It's not easy, it's not going to be easy, but we need to do it.
Okay, thank you. Steve?
Thank you. I just want to pick up very quickly on the point role model that came up, because I put it in a box and drawn right around it. It's very difficult to be a role model as soon as you start entering into any controversy, because the press you get is so bad, as anyone Googling me will discover. I want to pick up on relevance, and Ricky's point about relevance, because jobs and housing is always going to be relevant, I think. But other than that, diaspora is a very important point you raise. We are not very good at diaspora engagement, and different diasporas will have quite different interests and needs, because people will feel connected to, as people often say, home, even though they're British born and bred in several generations. So it may have the largest population from St Vincent and Grenadines outside the islands. They they will be extremely concerned when the volcano goes off. That's big news, that's a big deal. A man was showing me a picture of his house in Kashmir because it had been shelled by India. And so there it is, a couple of weeks after he'd been in it with his family, burning on fire because it had been shelled. But then we just say, oh, Kashmir is a matter for India and Pakistan to resolve. Well, that's no good to my constituent who could have got shelled and his family killed. So these issues, I think we're forgetting that you could go on with Turkey or whichever diaspora. Some of these issues, with the modern world and technology, those diaspora issues are super, super relevant. The instant they happen, I remember talking to a 14-year-old or so on the streets of Wickham at a protest about Modi's treatment of Muslims in India. And I said, do you keep in touch with friends in Kashmir and so on? She just looked at me like I was quite mad. Because of course she does, because they're all on FaceTime and all the rest of it, Instagram and all that, when they can get data from Kashmir. So we forget that the experience of young British people, and let's not forget we're talking about British people, but large numbers of young British people think that what's relevant is what's happening thousands of miles away. And that's a huge challenge which we haven't properly engaged with. So Israel-Palestine is absolutely classic in Wickham, where 1 in 6 of my voters is a British Muslim. Well, it says Asian on the census, but it means Kashmiris and British Muslims. Well, Muslims are very, very keenly aware of the suffering of Palestinian people, and it means anything that kicks off there is very present in Wickham. On NIMBYs versus planning, I'll just deal with it very quickly because it's come up time and again. What is socialism? It's planning. And people used to sort of know that, and here we are operating a planning system and then wondering why it doesn't work. It's because it's planning, it's socialism, it's state land use planning. So what do? We end up, one way or another, and however local it's made, it's still one group of people forcing their decisions on somebody else. And the set of incentives that creates is never going to work. Because it imposes what economists call externalities on people. You're going to build a house in someone's view, or you're going to have more traffic on the road, or whatever, without any compensation. And until we as conservatives, and it's our mere conservatism is what gets in the way, and until we conservatives start saying we've got to stop operating socialist institutions, we're not going to break through these problems. And for me, the planning system is the preeminent example, the most relevant and present example that's so relevant to young people. But we keep trying to operate a very, very old post-war Labour idea of how land use should be controlled. It's never going to work, and it results in the phenomenon you have.
Yeah.
At a general election, people know they want a Conservative government, but then they're protesting that they don't want us to operate a planning system, and yet we keep doing it. So I'll better stop there.
Okay. Jan?
Well, as a cabinet member in charge of planning for Kensington and Chelsea, this is something I deal with a lot. I mean, it's
surely there are no NIMBYs in Kensington and Chelsea.
None whatsoever. But you know, I know this is sort of a talk around getting youth involved, but actually, you're right. Planning is something where youth should certainly have a voice. And with my other hat on, we also deal with sort of licensing matters. And you know, we just shut nightclubs, we shut bars, we shut entertainment, simply because there's a bias towards respecting an objection more than the sort of tacit approval of the fact that the nightclub is full every weekend. So we take on board 3 objections to bring a license to a committee, putting a business out of action, when actually they were doing a roaring trade just a week before. And that's sort of a profound issue within our system, that the young aren't going to come in their numbers to say on a Thursday afternoon to object to the loss of a nightclub establishment, unless it is something symbolic like Fabric in East London or something like that. But when it's these small places in your community, they don't have the time. They're not involved, and this is really what we've tried to change, is actually getting the word out that much better. And the mechanisms we have are still slightly historic, you know, sign up to our weekly newsletter, here's a report from the planning committee on what, you know, activities happening in your area. We need to be a lot better at actually making sure that those people are involved before big decisions are taken for their area. How that actually comes to be is going to be very difficult to sort of fathom, but actually I think there should be a general bias towards continuation of policy rather than blockage or obfuscation from those that seek to sort of limit it. it's very hard to change policy in favour of young people. You know, we've got, going back to licensing again, sorry to bore you on it, but it's, you know, we have a policy that means all bars should shut at midnight. Why? That's not free market. That's not anything to do with the patrons of those businesses. It's simply because people living nearby that bought a home next to a nightclub on the swinging 60s of the King's Road now don't want that nightclub to exist. And you think it's the same policy that you have for pubs. We now protect them, thankfully, through national policy. But we lost a huge number of pubs converted into multi-million-pound houses. And fine, you've created a home, but actually you've lost what was a good little business for the local residents. And once you rip all those institutions out of an area, what's the point of living in it? You end up just creating areas to invest in housing rather than to live in it. And planning policy, unfortunately, does lean towards the investment model rather than the housing model, which it should do with all these buy-to-let creations funded by pension funds. It means that people never really get their chance to get on the ladder to actually be invested in their local area, because they're never going to be able to buy the home that they live in from the pension fund that's run from overseas. And this is really something that we've got to tackle as a party, is actually, do we want people to own their homes and get on the ladder, or do we want to just create housing as an investment product for financial institutions? And it's perhaps this is a little too London focused, but that's really one of the issues we have for the young around us.
Well, let's go from London to Essex, and Kaisa for Jennifer Green. Tell us about that.
I mean, for me, I'm usually involved with like other communities, big groups of them, and I mean, to show them respect and their tradition. That's important to them, and we all also celebrate together. That what's important to them is to be part of it. That's very important, and they seem to be a lot of youngsters that also follow in their own community path. So yeah, for me it's just that having being part of lots of other groups, other cultures. And traditions, respecting their traditions, that sort of gives us a good way of bringing people in.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And just finally on these couple of points, we have Rebecca, maybe you just give us your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So interestingly, the Brexit referendum, actually, the age group with the lowest turnout was 18 to 25. So even though there was so much news about young people's views on the issue, I don't know what the disconnect there is between really caring and voting. But in terms of engaging young people, I would say there's three things that we try to do. So one's outreach, one's representation, and one's letting them take the lead. So in terms of outreach, if you just try and invite people to things you're doing, you're only going to get the people who are kind of engaged anyway. It's about going to where young people are and probably engaging where 2/3 of the room don't think they want to listen to what you've got to say. You've got to try and win them over. The second one around representation, I think often we can think, oh, let's find the most important person to go and speak to these young people. Can we get a minister or someone who's their age that they can resonate with, has so much more cut through, someone who they can kind of see themselves emulating. And then the third one, in terms of letting them take the lead, all too often I see kind of young people policy engagement being, what do you think about this thing that we the adults have come up with? Can you critique it, rather than just going to them and saying, what do you care about? What do you want to see in your community? And just kind of seeing where that conversation goes, and reporting back to them on what you've done following those conversations. So that's certainly our approach anyway. Go to where they are, think about someone who'll resonate, and be willing to kind of not know where the conversation's going to go, and let them own it.
I'll come to you in a second, but we actually have quite a special guest here this afternoon. You may not be aware that His Excellency Ilan Suleymanov, who is the ambassador to the Republic of Azerbaijan, is here. Hello. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on what you've heard, Your Excellency.
I feel like I'm too old to speak
no,
on youth issues. But since I do have younger kids and all this, I think I would agree with the distinguished council. I live in Chelsea, Kensington, Chelsea. And I think there are two things which are really concerned. One, I'll talk to you in person. It's already regulated in terms of building and everything. This is impossible. I mean, no young person can afford anything, honestly speaking. An old ambassador barely can afford anything. So, and the other thing, there was a criminal closure of a Turkish fast food place, Simit Saray. So I'm left without any fast food lunch breaks, which is also a very serious issue. I think you should look at it. But in reality, I mean, I was young once in my own country, and I think the issue on diaspora, and the issue on what you said, I was thinking on outreach. How do we make sure that people are actually interested? I mean, if their passion is in Kashmir, you ask why not Brexit? Because for British Muslims from Kashmir or Pakistan, or British Muslims from Palestine, or British Jewish British person from Israel, or just Jewish person, for them that mattered much more than Brexit. It had immediate connection to them, emotional connection. And I think one of the problems my government is always facing with, and I'm pretty sure most of the governments around the world, especially those who turn to be on the conservative side, is to make an emotional appeal. You're absolutely right. You can't get a very young person to discuss anything very specific to the policy as we discuss. I mean, we get bored with that. If it comes to a nightclub, maybe. But on other issues, I mean, honestly, too much attention span, they're overwhelmed with so many other things. So I think there needs to be an emotional connection to these people, to engage people on how to do that. We have to be careful. We have been just recently subject of an attack by a very emotional Birmingham-based religious group called Mahdi Servants Union. So I don't want them to get over emotional, because they do get then attacking other people. But to get some connection to the policy, I think that's the key. And honestly, it's not easy. I mean, it's easy said than done, because you don't want to get into too many extremes. And that's a challenge we all have. I mean, look, 10 years I served in the United States as ambassador to Washington, and you could see the difference between at some point conservatives, the Republican Party was able to lift up the connection to the younger generation, to work very well. But now they're far behind, because the Democrats were able to appeal to the issues which are touching them. And I have to tell you, I was at a Labour conference, because I was there as well. We were there a week ago. Connectivity is a little bit more effective. So I think that's my personal observation. Maybe I'm not.
I think you're right in that there is definitely, especially with people from the vote, there's a very emotional connection, and emotion is a major part of politics. And sometimes we talk about is, you know, are there parties are too presidential now? People saying I voted for Boris rather than I voted Conservative or whatever. Jeremy Corbyn, obviously someone who incited a lot of emotions in people, some positive, some negative, and certainly there is, I think that's a really, really interesting point, so thank you very much, Your Excellency. We're going to get round the panel again entirely, but I want to take any final questions. I know this gentleman had two more, yeah.
Yes, as Kay said, my name's Matthew. I was elected at 22 years old and the youngest councillor in our local borough.
Well done.
I think one of the youngest in London, but we're trying to get CCH. I completely, I mean, Rebecca, what you said there, those 3 points, I completely think those are spot on about, you know, outreach, representation, and let them take the lead. I mean, one of the things I've always said is at the end of the day, if you want to know about the concerns of young people, ask a young person. I think that's what Steve said about we need to listen to young people. But what can we do to convince maybe some of the not so young people anymore to allow a young person to have that opportunity? Because when I was standing for the selections, I managed to be selected ahead of 2 long-term standing councillors, and it caused a huge argument in our local association and nearly tore us apart. So what can we do? I mean, I was willing to take the bullet for it, I don't mind, that's fine, I'm young, I'll be here for a long time. But what can we do to try and convince people to say, look, you do need change, we do need fresh blood, and actually a young person standing up and getting selected and getting elected is actually a really good thing for our party.
There is sometimes a generational divide.
Yeah, I'd be conscious to get some ideas.
Well, let's note that. I go to the man in the second row.
Yeah, I don't know how to phrase it as a conservative member and from Diaspora. I'm from Congo myself. And there is a big issue in terms of the way we are trying to engage young people, specifically young from diaspora background. There is a lack of community cohesion. I heard Honorable Steve talking about Kashmir, Diaspora, we need to think as Conservative Party how we are engaging with the diaspora based on the culture. We are not culture sensitive. Maybe the way they use as emotions, or use it as a culture. How can we change the policies so that we feel included? Because many diaspora, they don't feel included with the Conservative Party. They feel like they belong to them.
Okay, yeah, well, that is a problem for the Conservative Party. I'm not a member of any political party. I hasten that. And there's one question at the back there as well.
No, I would like to, I'm coming from a German-Turkish background, so born and raised in Germany, and it's interesting to hear like the party trends, cleavages, political identification problems. What I can say from Germany, for example, we had young people trying to engage in communities, becoming councillors and MPs. They got basically disengaged from politics, and one of the main factors was that whenever they tried to go into their communities and speak to politicians, whenever something happened over in Turkey, they were the ones that had to represent the Turkish president, and they said, hey, I'm German, so why are you trying to relate me to a Turkish problem? I'm not representing that country, I can't vote in it, but I'm ethnically there and my family is there. So I think there's a responsibility as well for politicians, how you talk to the young community. Are we brand marking them? And how can we, to your point, Ambassador, emotionally engage with them more, show them, yes, we care about Kashmir or the economic crisis going on in Turkey, I'm sure your family is struggling, but don't put that person, the Turkish person, as the one representing another country. So there's this fine balance, I think, which can lead to disengagement. And another question that I quickly had, Peter, is the populist leaders that you spoke about. So I would like to know from Rebecca if she observed a trend, for example, that whenever we had like a popular prime minister in this country or some popular ministers, whether engagement of young voters increased versus when we had more moderates, because there's a recent Cambridge study that says amongst the age group of 18 to 34, there is a massive decline in democratic participation, but whenever populist leaders come on board, there is a massive rise again in voting. So are you observing these trends as well, or even to the politicians?
Okay, there's loads there to get through. In all the questions, I'm going to go from right to left. We have about 10 minutes, so if people could just finish off and take no more than about 2 minutes. I know there's lots there, but if we just get through with quick opinions, we'll start. I'll go right to left. We'll start with Kaisa, please.
Matthew, what you put forward is, I totally agree. We should be able to, we should be more engaging with you guys and giving you more advice, helpful advice. And again, as I said in the beginning of my speech, to respect your views and just be a role model for you.
Matthew, so I think giving young people a platform and an opportunity to speak. Young people are so articulate. I've not been in a room where a young person hasn't expressed their views and everyone in there's gone, wow, we should hear more from you. The other one is so many issues we face at the moment require an intergenerational contract between older and younger generations and future generations, and therefore having conversations across generations is super, super important if we're not going to unduly burden any one generation. On the diaspora point, we could learn from young people. Young people are able to debate with each other, have complete disagreements, feel no qualms about it, they don't have any bad blood, they just go to their next lesson still friends, and respect each other's differences. We definitely see that in the classroom, so I think we can learn from young people in that case. On the populism, gosh, there's so much research out there. I guess what I have seen, I think when young people are the time when I've seen young people most politically awake and aware of who leaders are was actually during the pandemic, when they were waiting for the news every night to find out what was happening. They could name ministers and what department they were in charge of during that period. They couldn't before and they can't now, but they could during that time. So I think it doesn't really answer your question because I think there's more research out there than I perhaps have expertise in, but it's about what impacts their lives and who they see and how important it feels to them. And then absolutely an emotional connection. That's why we all get involved in politics, because there's something that really motivates us and inspires us and we really, you know, care about, and it's no different for young people, and absolutely we try to create that emotional connection, because I think that is what's going to get any fire in anyone's belly and get them to go out day after day, even though it's hard to make change sometimes.
Steve? Well, there's so much to be said about culture. I mean, certainly Wickham being so very diverse, and we seem to rub along there great, actually. But I would say that it's one of the most tricky problems we need to deal with, because condemning wokeness just won't do. What we need to be is well-mannered and civil towards everyone. And like any civil person should, we should just try and understand where the other person's coming from and just try and see the world as they see it. Not because we'll succeed when we try, but just because it's good manners to at least attempt to see what the world looks like from someone else's point of view. But then, having done that, we should be radically committed to equality. But what kind of equality? Not equality of outcome, because that's where I think the left go wrong. There's no justice in equal outcomes for all, irrespective of choices made. And yet we don't want to leave anyone behind. So, the formal or moral equality of every person, yes. The legal equality of every person, their political equality, which actually turns out to be quite difficult when it's equalising constituency sizes, and their equality of opportunity, yes, all of those things. So we go forward as Conservatives together, irrespective of identity, and I'm so glad people are not doing this. Great. And then when you engage on culture, I think it's incumbent on us to just gently try and understand where people are coming from. So if I was to look at Wickham, I hope people won't mind me saying I think that a Caribbean community will slightly see the world differently to perhaps an African diaspora community because of history. I think that if you're talking to Hindu, Sikhs and Muslims, it's no good just seeing them as people from Pakistan and India. You've got to understand different religions, traditions, cultures, and how people see different political ideas through that lens. But this is just to understand people as individuals with good manners. So the other thing I want to just pick up, but there's lots of fine lines. You said about so many fine lines in here, and it's so easy as a politician. I'm conscious you're filming, and that's lovely, and I don't mind. But I'm just aware that I've only got to get something slightly wrong, and it will be a disaster. But thankfully, I've engaged with these issues enough. I don't think I have yet. Just to pick up on populism, it's the curse of easy answers. That's, I think, why people turn out. It's the curse of easy answers. And again, fine lines. No one wants to be condescending. But I do just think when you've got a few grey hairs, you have heard it all before. And you're less likely to be caught out by populists with their curse of easy answers. Because everybody wants lower taxes and higher spending. So if a populist turns up and offers that, you've got to ask, well, where's the money going to come from then, and what are the consequences when we borrow a debased currency? But I've said too much. But yeah, populism is something which all of us should be fighting. But at the heart of all of it is a willingness to treat others with goodwill and civility. And that is, I think, where we are often at a disadvantage, because I think as a rule, Conservatives do that, and I think as a rule, our opponents don't. And all we can do is continue to witness grace and kindness to them, however mean they may be.
What a hopeful end to yeah, sorry, you want to add? Yeah.
No, just to say thank you very much. May I be excused?
Of course,
I have
of
to
course.
Go somewhere to drop as well.
Go ahead, by all means. Thank you.
Thank everyone for being here.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you. And just briefly, because we only have a couple of minutes left, and other people who have things to do at 2 o'clock. Let's go briefly to Neva and to Jem.
Busy. I think I agree. We have to be a bit careful about identity politics, and I completely resonate with the points you raised. I think, as a woman of diverse ethnic and religious background, I don't want to be seen for my gender, race, ethnicity. I want to be seen for my ideas and my policies. And I think that's really important. We have to overcome that leftist identity politics narrative.
Nothing has changed since you were born.
And I think that's really, really important. And what is actually quite insulting to anyone is to tell them that they're there because of their identity, not because they're good, not because they're really actually it's just because of their identity. That's incredibly insulting. So I think we have to be so careful with this identity politics and fight the Labour and fight the left narrative on this. So that's point number one. I think point number two, and this is really, really crucial. So one thing I find quite frustrating as a young women, as I find myself quite often, again, not all young conservative women, because I'm not in my 20s, but younger women in their 30s than the average age of the groups I go into, is this view that somehow I will listen to people tell me what issues face women and what issues face women and millennial women in their 30s, and you sort of sometimes think, gosh, well, thanks for telling me thanks for telling me the challenges with different religious groups, but I think we just have to have that dialogue more. And I think within that, again, let's not fall into the left trap of saying, let's we have to create that opportunity. Yes, we create the opportunity, but it's up to individuals to seize those opportunities. We should not be talking about quotas. We should be talking about creating the opportunities so that people can step into those roles, can have that space, and we should be supporting them through that. So things like the CCHQ development schemes, at association level, I made sure that, for instance, I've got a councillor who's 18, youngest councillor in the country. So I've teamed him up with one of my other councillors to make sure that he's been mentored, and I've spoken to the leader of the council to make sure that we've got that. He was getting hounded by media. What we didn't want is early on in his career, suddenly he kind of gets really disenchanted. So we can create those kind of systems, but it was up to him to make sure that he understood the role of a councillor, to come forward, to apply and fight hard. So we didn't create any exceptions, but once someone is there, you say, right, how do we support them? How do we make sure that they've got a network that is inclusive? And I think that's really it. So those would be my 2 main points. Let's not fall into the leftist narrative. Let's not create this kind of element of identity politics, be it gender, race, or ethnicity.
And Jen?
Very conscious of time. I suppose just looking at the heading of the topic today of how do we get them involved, we've just got to be more fun, to be honest. I think we just do. I've been to countless church hall conversations with resident associations. I'd much prefer if we did them in the pub or if we went to a bar or something. But actually, look, we're here on a Tuesday in the afternoon. Do we expect lots of young people to come along to a Tuesday afternoon event?
In a suit.
In a suit, right? So you get what you set out to, what the way you pitch yourself. So I think we just as a party and actually just as a political spectrum need to be a lot better at going out ourselves to the communities that we actually want to hear from. If we really do believe in having youth leaders coming forwards, we've got to hear from them where they are.
Very good. Well, wonderful. Listen, thanks so much to the panel. Thank you to everybody for coming. There's lots and lots to think about. We've had a really good debate today. And thanks to everybody who participated. And thanks to the Circle Foundation for putting this on as well. Have a lovely afternoon. Enjoy the rest of the conference.